Hey guys, it's Casey and welcome back to my channel. How are you? I hope that you're doing well. I myself am physically doing very well, mentally not so much. And so I wanted to come on here today and first of all, discuss exactly why I'm filming more videos than I typically do in a week, because somebody did ask me that in the comments section a couple of videos ago. And so I thought now would be a good time to address the elephant in the room. To put it short and sweet and very, very bluntly, I am filming more videos at the moment because my English skills, my verbal English skills, are diminishing at a rapid rate. My conversational skills come across as fine when you're talking to me, but that's just because everyone else's English is equally bad as mine, to be honest, whether or not it's their first language. But my functional English skills when I'm talking, especially in a business capacity, as soon as I go over 2 to 3 syllables, it's like Elvis. It has left the building, my English skills. So though my videos have never been strictly scripted, my longer sit down videos, I do come on here and have a very strong mental checklist about what I need to talk about and what I need to cover. And so even though the big words are there, I have previously thought about them, and if I've had problems pronouncing them in the past, I have tried to pronounce them again. So even without a script, they are slightly scripted in my head, if not on paper. So the point of filming all these videos is for me to come on here and have an opportunity to speak proper English in a fluent manner that is away from all judgment, or at least you can't judge me to my face, and that counts as no judgment, and see how I go before I am forced to go through the humiliation ritual that is remedial English classes. Secondly, which is less of a reason, but still very much a reason that I'm doing this, is that I am a perfectionist. I like to come on here with a clear understanding of what I'm trying to say, when I'm trying to say it, and the point that I'm trying to put across. And I think that is bleeding into my English issues, in which I don't like to talk unless I know what I'm trying to say. And so trying to get comfortable talking in a way that I'm not always an expert in what I'm saying, and I haven't had previous time to think about what I'm saying, will also help me in real life moving forward. And so I'm planning on releasing 4 to 5 videos a week for at least the next month or 2 months moving forward, which is a lot. It is a big uptake to what I was filming, but I feel like now is the time, now is the place to address this problem. And as an on-flow to that, I cannot promise that all my videos are going to be the most interesting videos that you've ever seen in your entire life, including today's video, but that's part of the journey. It is allowing myself to not always be the most interesting person in every single room that I step foot in, which is very, very hard because I am the most interesting person in the world. Well, not literally, but I think, and I'm sure that a lot of the scientists that I work with and who come and talk to me would agree that I probably am one of the most interesting people in the world. Definitely top 10 most interesting people in the world. I'm also one of the most humble, as you can tell. Anyway, today I am going back to basics because it is a lot of work filming and editing so many videos in a week. I mean, I've only done 4 this week, but it still feels like a lot of work, especially if you consider the fact I'm still working 60 to 80 hours a week in the hospital. So doing that on top of this and doing this on top of that is not going to be the easiest journey of my life. But as I said, I think it's a really, really important one, especially if I want to save myself from the humiliation that is having to go into the city and sit in a classroom and learn English again, a language that I have been learning for most of my life and have been speaking as my everyday language for the past 11 years, going on 12 years now. So I want to avoid that as much as I can. And if this is how I avoid that, this is what I'm going to do. But like I said, easy peasy day. We're doing the journal again, my grandmother's life journal. I find this easy, and a lot of people that watch my videos find these interesting because they talk a lot about the culture, that it's a different time, it's a different place, it's a different feeling, it's a different emotion, it is just different customs, different things. And so I filled in 3 of them today, and I'm just going to go through them with you and unpack exactly what I wrote down. Question number 1 for the day. Describe a time that you should have gotten into trouble, but you got away with it. Okay, so I have mentioned this before, but I will mention it here again for people who aren't familiar or haven't watched my videos before, when I was growing up, where I was growing up, movies and TV shows, they weren't banned or forbidden, but they were heavily, heavily regulated. You could not just go home and pop on Netflix. There was no Netflix. Netflix did not exist. There was a cinema that was open only on weekends, and it showed one movie at a time, and it showed that one movie for about a month straight. So every month you had a chance to watch one movie and one movie only. And the kind of movies that were shown were highly regulated as well. So you could see Harry Potter or you could see Lord of the Rings, but you could not see anything. Like my culture didn't make new movies. It wasn't something that we really did. Or if we did, it was something that was done as like propaganda. To be honest, it was propaganda movies. And so all the movies were very poorly dubbed over, and you would go and see them. It would be a whole thing. You would go with your friends and you'd make a date of it, and it would be a whole evening. And all the movies that were shown were very specifically selected because they had they had both no antisocial themes, and they did not glorify digital technology. Both things that were big no's in where I grew up. TV was exactly the same. So technically everybody owned a TV. Everybody had to own a TV because they would do like the president's announcements every 3 months and you had to go and watch them. And then on Sunday evenings, only on Sunday evenings, they had the news broadcast, and the rest of the time there was no news. You had to get a newspaper and read it in the newspaper. But Sunday evenings were very important, and everyone would sit down and everyone would watch it. And same with Sunday mornings, that they would put children's cartoons on the television so that children wouldn't wake their parents up, I'm assuming, because it was the one day a week that parents got off. And I guess it was kind of like to prevent them from rioting in the street because they were exhausted and never got a break. So there was cartoons on a Sunday morning. But besides that, nobody watched TV. It wasn't really socially acceptable to be watching TV unless you were like bedbound. And even then, if you were bedbound, there still wasn't a lot to watch. There was one channel that you could watch, and it showed just old reruns of like the Brady Bunch twice a day, and one midday movie. There was like an after-school special from the 70s, and then that was it. The rest of the time, if you turned on your TV, there was nothing there to watch except for a screensaver of a fish tank that played classical music in the background. Oh, and exercise. They also did exercises at like 6 a.m. every single morning, and everyone was supposed to get up and do the exercise. They would go and they would film like the aerobics class somewhere, and you were supposed to follow along, but I don't think anyone did it. Well, I never did it. I sometimes got up when I was up in the morning. I would turn it on and watch it because I found it really weird, but I don't think I ever actually followed along with it, and neither did my mother. When I was at school, and I went to a private all-girls school, my best friend's name was Jamriel. And Jamriel's older cousin, he was a small-time criminal, and his crime of choice is that he would sell bootleg copies of banned TV shows and movies from an alleyway. Now, to anybody who did not grow up in the kind of social system that I did, this does not sound like a big deal. This just sounds like a very teeny tiny petty crime, but it was a big deal. It was a huge deal, because you need to understand that if the authorities where we lived found out that you were in possession of this kind of illicit material, you would get into big trouble. And the way the big trouble would look where I lived is that we as a society functioned on a social credit system, and it would affect your social credit system. It would affect your family's social credit system tremendously, because anything that seemingly promoted or contained examples of antisocial behavior was public enemy number one. But not only did my friend Jamriel have a shit ton of illegal VHS tapes of movies and TV shows, her cousin had also gifted her this teeny tiny portable VHS player that had like a little screen on it that kind of looked like a Nintendo DS screen, so we could watch these movies wherever we wanted to on the go. So whenever Jamriel and I had a sleepover, whether it was at her house or whether it was at my house, it didn't matter. She would whip out this little portable VHS player she had, and we would try our best to piece together the plots from poorly dubbed, and sometimes not even dubbed, or if they were dubbed in like Swedish or something, some kind of language that we didn't even know existed or knew how to piece together, because we learned English at school. Not fantastic English. It wasn't like the first language that we learned, but we did learn a little bit of English to, have enough that when I first came here, I had a little bit of a working knowledge of, yes, please, no, where do you live, blah, 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 things like that. but Swedish we had no working knowledge with. But we would try to piece together the plots from these terrible quality VHS recordings of shows like Lost and The X-Files and Twin Peaks, which in hindsight should really tell you something about the kind of teenager that I was. Clearly, Jamriel's parents were aware that she had this portable VHS player, but my mother was not. Or rather, I think that my mother was aware that she had it, but she never said anything about it because my mother was anything but an idiot. And so whenever Jamriel slept over, and our bedrooms were right next to each other because I was the only child, so whenever Jamriel slept over and, the do-do-do-do-do-do drifted out from beneath my bedroom door at 2 a.m. in the morning, my mother was probably clever enough to put 2 and 2 together and realize that Jamriel had brought something into the house that she wasn't supposed to have. But she never said anything, which in hindsight I think is really, really cool. Because again, in hindsight, it would have made perfect sense for my mother to just forbid me from ever associating with Jamriel again, because the social credit system was brutal. It was brutal in a way that I think is very difficult for people who have never experienced such a system to really comprehend. But to try and explain it, if your social credit got low to the point that, it was dirt low, you could get kicked out of your house and out of the area, and sometimes be at risk of being put into what is called a reform house, which was basically like a Victorian workhouse and a gulag, had a baby together, had a illicit love child. It was really, really bad. So my mother would have been completely and totally in her rights to say that I was never to speak or look at or think of Jamriel ever again, but she never did. And so that was really cool, because for us in particular, me and my mother, it would have been even worse. It would have been even worse if I was found with this portable VHS player in my possession, because my grandmother was also the mayor of our city, which means that it probably would have been a big social scandal. Like, my grandmother probably would have covered it up in terms of, legality, but it would have been a scandal all the same. And we would have heard about it every single day, every single hour of every single day until the end of time. So yeah, the fact that my mother just allowed it to go on and we never got into trouble for it was pretty cool. Question number 2. What games did you like to play and who did you play them with? We played a lot of games, 24/7, especially during summer. The games never stopped. Everyone played together all the time because, again, we had no TV, we had no internet. Our parents were working all the time. So we had to find ways to keep ourselves entertained. And a lot of the times we were being kicked out of the house because the women who didn't work, the mothers who didn't work, they had a secret job, which was getting drunk at book club with each other and gossiping. And so they liked to have the parlor and the den and the sitting room to themselves. And so all the children were always kicked outside during the day, like I said, especially during summer when we weren't at school. And we had to keep ourselves entertained. For example, and this one's really, really bad, probably the worst one. One of our neighbors had a rooster and they used to put it outside in the communal garden every day because their back gate opened up to the communal garden. And we all terrorized the poor thing. In hindsight, really, really poor behavior on our half. But it was a crazy thing. It was a crazy rooster. And so we would all try to sneak up on it. And then when it realized that we were there, it would turn around and it would chase us. And we would all run away screaming whenever it chased us. And we would do this all the time to an embarrassingly old age, all of us. Like, I think the last time that I did it, I was like 15, which is very, very old to be doing that kind of stupid thing. We would play a game called Cloaks and Shadows, which, again, in hindsight, now looking back as an adult with life experience outside of my own city, I realized has really racial undertones towards Dresselbeck's people. So what it was is, it was a game that you only played at night. And it was kind of like capture the flag, where someone would light a candle and they would place the candle down and it was their job to protect it. And your job was to try to sneak up and blow the candle out without being caught. And again, in hindsight, I now realize that, it was kind of a racist game, but at the time, we didn't know any better and it was just a bit of fun. We played a lot of running games. We were running 24/7. One game in particular was called Windmill, and it's where someone started out as the windmill, so they would spin around with their arms like out in a windmill type pattern, and if you got hit, you became another windmill, and so on and so forth until there was one person left or someone vomited, whichever came first, and then the game would end. Obstacle courses were very, very popular when I was growing up, and there was basically a new one every single week, especially during summer when they like to move them as much as possible into a water type situation. And the most popular way, especially as you got older, that people would play obstacle courses is that you would get into a team of 3, and 2 of the people in the team of 3, they would be blindfolded and they would have their arm and their leg, one arm and one leg tied together, so they had to move as kind of like a unit. And then the third member, there was a guardia pole usually in the area where they set up the obstacle courses, which was just in a garden. There was a communal garden, and there was a guardia pole where the guardia would stand up there and they would observe everything that was going on in the city and around that area, except for when we were playing obstacle course. So the caller would go up there and they would call out instructions for the team, for their teammates to move through the obstacle course, kind of like that Survivor challenge. Like, I think there's a similar challenge in Survivor to that, except for it's much more organized. And there is a lot less broken bones from falling off wet bales of hay being acquired in Survivor, at least as far as I'm concerned. But it was a lot of fun. Everyone loved a good obstacle course. There was Don't Wake the Chicken, which was very similar to Red Light, Green Light, except for if you got caught moving when the chicken woke up, you didn't get squid gamed. You had to quickly run back to the start. And if you got caught during that process, you then became the chicken. There was The Wellkeeper's Daughter, which was a very weird game. Even at the time, I thought it was a really weird game and I didn't really enjoy it. It was someone, usually a girl, almost always a girl. She would go and she would sit at the base of the well, and then there would be 2 teams and they would go up and she would whisper a secret to them, and then you had to pass it around the 2 teams. So 2 secrets would be passed and you put them together and it came up with one secret, and you had to try to communicate it in a way that your team got the secret and the other team didn't get the secret, and if you got it wrong, she would curse you. We had so many games. I think that I could quite literally sit here for about an hour just naming off games that we played when I was growing up, because again, we had no other way to entertain ourselves. We had to entertain each other. And the way that we did that was by playing games, to an age that I think today in the modern West would be quite embarrassing that we were playing games. But in saying that, I think that reflects more poorly on your culture than it does mine. I think you don't have much of a childhood. Like, that was a good way to grow up. It was a good way to make friendships. And admittedly, I had a lot of problems. And so I didn't make a lot of solid friendships until I was like 16 and I met Ilya and everything else along those lines. I always had friends. I have never had any problem making friends, but I have a lot of problems keeping friends, and a lot of that is to do with me because I get bored with my friends quite quickly and I move on and I'm like, oh, there's got to be something better out there. I don't want to be friends with this person anymore, which is not a great way to move through life, but it is the way that I move through life. But I think it was a great way to grow up. I'm happy that that was the way that I grew up, and I didn't grow up here in the modern West where childhood more or less ends at 7 years old and moves on to makeup and TikToks and watching movies and doing this and doing that and never spending time outside and with people in the real world. So I'm happy that that was my childhood, even though, I myself was quite miserable as a child. Question number 3. Using all 5 senses, describe the city you grew up in. Okay, so the city that I grew up in was Bethany, which was the capital city of the small tropical country that I am from. Bethany itself was set back about 10-15 kilometers from the shore, so it wasn't a beachside city, and yet it kind of was a beachside city at the same time. It was kind of in between. You could go down there. There was enough time to make that journey down there, and you could do a whole day trip down there, and there was a small little beachside town that you could do all the little activities that you wanted to do, or you could stay there overnight, or you could have dinner in the seafood restaurant. It was a whole affair. And then you could still, if you lived in Bethany, you could still have enough time after you'd finished everything that you wanted to do to come home at the end of the day. So it kind of was a beachside city. You could still hear the waves when it was really, really heavy crash out there, and it still smelled like ocean. lot of the time. It's coming over the walls, you could still smell it, so it really depends on what you count as a seaside city. Bethany's population when I was growing up was around 111,000 people in the main city itself, but the census tended to count all the people in the surrounding villages and towns, all the way to the shore, all the way a little bit out the other way. And that brought it up on paper to around 200,000 people, which was a pretty big city from where I was. It wasn't huge. It was nowhere near the biggest city in the world, but it was a good sized city. It was enough that we had enough people for a variety of different food and cultural events and fashion and never-ending gossip, and I enjoyed growing up there. Now, when I was filling these out, I went a bit flowery on this one, and so I'm actually going to read it. I didn't read the other ones. I had a discussion about the points that I brought up, but I didn't read it word for word what I wrote down. I'm going to read word for word what I wrote down here because it's actually a little bit funny that I've written it this way. And also I got sick of writing after I got to the smell section and I gave up. So you're going to be very educated on how Bethany smells and not very educated on really anything else. So without further ado, here is my description of Bethany that I have written down, and you can laugh at it with me because I'm laughing at it. Bethany was always cloaked in bluestone and colour, like a fortress that dedicated itself to a carnival. The sky always looked a little bit wrong. Too purple at dusk, too blue at noon, too pink at dawn. It didn't matter the district you visited, the first thing you noticed in Bethany was always colour. Strings of flags and banners fluttered above your head, alleyways and brick walls painted in vibrant graffiti that had been commissioned by the city council itself. Perfectly manicured gardens of hibiscus and colourful orchards dotted each alleyway. Fabric and paper decorations of reds, greens, and yellows catching on the light. Everything is bright and busy, everywhere, all the time. The stone under your boots is blue and sandy, worn smooth in the centre where countless feet have passed, rougher at the edges where moss creeps in, fine groves in green. What does that even mean? I don't know. I don't know if I read that correctly, but we're going to roll with it. Sound is everywhere. The city is stitched together by birdsong and music. The light, airy daytime theme that seems to come out of the nowhere and everywhere, all at once, played on the bright, chimey instruments that sound like a clockwork band is hidden behind every single wall. Closer, there's the cloak of signs swinging in the fresh ocean breeze, the thump of doors, the echo of voices bouncing off the stone. A cat mews indignantly for someone to feed it. A guardian shifts his weight and shuffles in tiny board steps. The clock tower at the heart of the central district grinds and the city clicks away, so often massive gears inside shifting with a metallic groan, and every hour on the hour, the bell tolls, deep, resonant, rolling through your ribs, the sound of waves crashing, everything else all the time. Everywhere, all at once. There's the constant murmur of people, snippets of conversations, merchants calling half-heartedly for customers, the gossiping twitter of townies. Further away, a dog barks. A rooster lets out a ragged crow. Do roosters crow? Oh yeah, I guess they do. Anyway, somewhere, someone drops a crate, and the crash momentarily silences the plaza before the sound washes back, louder than ever before. The air carries a tang of ocean and some warm stone. There's a slightly dusty smell of old paper and cloth the closer you walk towards the university. Past it, nearer the shops, the air smells busy. Metal and oil, coins and dust and something faintly burnt. From the cafes and houses, there's a comforting aroma. Onions softened and fat. Bread toasting, something savoury, simmering in herbs. Closer to the centre of the city is brighter and sharper on the nose. This is the tourist space where games and stalls clutter the street. There's the sugary scent of festival treats, fried dough, skewers of meat and fish, the faint note of smoke and char on the wind. Beneath all this, always, everywhere, all at once. Is the subtle smell of the sea, salt and water, and something faintly briny carried over the walls in the windy days to remind everyone, everywhere, that the world outside the city is wide and not entirely tamed. Dun, dun, dun. And then I gave up. I gave up. And I thought that was very, very good an hour and a half ago when I wrote it. And then reading it back before I read it on this video, I was like, what was I thinking? That is the most cringe thing I have ever produced in my entire life. And now I'm going to have to read it on video because I said that I would. And so here I am reading the cringy work of my 2 p.m. mind for the whole world to listen to if they want. My purple prose on crack. Anyway, that's it. That's all I've got. That is all I produced. There was another question. It was like, what is your first memory of your family or your siblings or something like that? I guess technically I do have siblings. I have siblings on my dad's side, but they're younger and I didn't really grow up with them. I just spent like a couple of weeks each summer with my father, and then he would come and visit me a few times during the year. Like, I had a good relationship with my father. It's just, I didn't see much of him. He was a medic, and then he found the gods and he became a bee farmer. So he made honey and he was very successful in that. But besides that, I lived with my mother most of the time, and she wouldn't have let me move in with him anyway. And even if she did, I think my grandmother would have just taken full custody of me if my mother did. And so she never did. But yeah, that is my purple prose. That is my country. That is the games I played. And that is how I never got in trouble for watching illicit VHS tapes in my bedroom when I was 14. Well, let's be real. It went on a lot longer. It went on until I was 16 and I kind of left the country. I came back very briefly when I was 17, and then I left and never came back. Well, I mean, I came back in terms of to visit my mother every now and then, especially during winter, because where I went during winter, it was really, really cold all the time and snowing. And again, I grew up in a tropical environment, so I was not a fan of the reality of that, even though in theory, I really liked the snow. I liked the idea of snow, but I didn't like the reality of it. So I would often go to my mother's during winter, the worst of winter. But yeah, that's it for tonight. I don't have anything more. So this is Casey signing off. As always, stay weird out there, stay safe, and have a productive evening. Good night.